Professor Rao sir, who welcomed me, Professor P.S. Dihaya, Vice Chancellor of Mangaluru University, Dr. Srinivas Kokilaya, Vidwan T.M. Krishna, and the artist accompanying him, esteemed members of P.P. Gomathi Memorial Education Trust, and also faculty members of Brahmashree Narayana Guru Study Center, Mangalore University, teachers, students, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be standing before you today to deliver a lecture in memory of a very great educationist who had dedicated her life for the upliftment of the weaker sections. We need memories of such inspiring figures, and you have been holding these lectures annually. I understand Professor Ganesh Devi had spoken before me last year or before a couple of years. So I really feel honored to be delivering this lecture. And today when I heard Professor Gomathi was born and brought up in Tellicherry and studied in Government Brennan College, I was greatly, in a way, there was a kind of destiny which brought me here. I was a former student of Brennan College, then went beyond Kerala to many other places, teaching English and writing in both English and Malayalam. And it's my writings which actually brought me here. And I am very happy to note that from the website I could actually gather that all her life Professor Gomathi dreamed of a society in which there wouldn't be any discrimination of any type. The way she carried forward her commitment to her chosen field of work, education and social service, makes her an exceptional pioneer. And looking towards today's situation, whatever we do for the upliftment of the girl child, women in society, it would actually fall short of the requirement. And I have always admired people who worked with single-minded devotion for such issues of social commitment. Thank you for Dr. Srinivas ji and also Professor Keshavan Veluthat, who suggested my name and created this occasion for my presence here. And now I go on to actually talk about the lecture, the topic, Sri Narayana Guru, Saint, Reformer and Poet. See, when we talk about a figure like Narayana Guru, there is always a certain, I have spoken about him, delivered lectures in a few places, but this is more of a mixed audience in a university system or in a research institute kind of context. My language would be very different. And here I am sure it's an audience mixed with, there are students, there are people who are very well informed on Narayana Guru. They may kindly forgive me for my inadequacies if I actually, for want of, because he is a person you can actually research, study, explore for decades together, and there would be missing links. And we in Kerala are yet to really create, there is not even a complete intellectual biography of Narayana Guru in Malayalam. All these actually limitations exist, but we need to revisit what he stood for, what he did, and what kind of a trajectory actually he moved through. I will have to initially spend maybe a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, to locate his Narayana Guru's work in a context of Kerala, 19th century Kerala. I would say the long 19th century, because the way you look at 19th century, there are many narratives that actually can come out of the 19th century Kerala. If you look at, for example, the missionary modernity kind of narrative, it was in 1821 that the first printing press is established by that too in Kottayam by Basil Mission Press, a Protestant missionary, Benjamin Bailey. He begins printing books, and he was the person who designed the font of Malayalam script. And by 1829, the New Testament appears in print. By 1849, both Malayalam English and English Malayalam dictionaries were published. And the first periodicals from Tellicherry, from Kottayam, etc., now gradually emerge. And the standardization of Malayalam language. This is very important when we look at the works of Narayana Guru, because there is a context in which his own works, we need to actually place his own poetic works. And we also should be clear that there was a public sphere by the late 19th century to which he was responding. Periodicals, public sphere, print, all these created a certain awakening into history. The idea of waking up, the idea of, in a way, enlightenment, the idea of a new kind of Kerala subjectivity, a new kind of Kerala self, all these become central to the context of Narayana Guru's work. So I would actually say his, this is the one narrative which actually gives us a certain idea of 19th century. We can map this 19th century from many other perspectives. The caste structure, which again requires a very long kind of narrative, but I would actually confine myself to certain very basic facts. Kerala had more than 220 castes, which did not include subcaste. In fact, in Indian context, when we speak of caste, we actually mean the subcaste. Among Nayars alone, there were 41 subcastes. And among the lower caste, maybe there were more than 170 subcastes. All these are taken from Bhaskara Nunni's 19th century Kerala, a very definitive work. And Sanal Mohan, a sociologist from Mahatma Gandhi University, he uses the word slave caste. Slavery had already become entrenched in Kerala's social system by the 16th century. The Dutch people who dominated Kerala coast had begun capturing lower caste people and exporting them. Even 10-year-old child, 9-year-old child. Recently, Vinil Paul has brought out a very path-breaking book called Adima Keralam, the Kerala of slaves. And it's heart-rending to read some of the chapters. The kind of extreme kind of trauma. People who were sent to Mauritius, South Africa, many other, even Trinidad, and this continued for almost 3 centuries. So slave caste, even in North Kerala, I have actually been aware that there are temples, annual festivals would be the occasion for auctioning the lower caste. It would be a 1-year contract. But this was bonded labor which continued into 1950s. So we need to actually remember the kind of dehumanization which had gone into the social structure of Kerala did not even register on the enlightened upper caste or even the middle caste. There were continuous caste conflicts. There are records of, you see, lower caste women were not allowed to wear anything of an upper garment. They were not allowed to wear any earring, anything on their nose, or any mala, or any kind of, even made of stone beads. There are in Kerala history, Kallumala Samaram. Even in the last decades of 19th century, an Iriva woman who was wearing nose ring, it was forcibly injuring her. I mean, it was cut off, or you see, forcibly taken out. Chanar Lehala, Chanar, it's a lower caste converted to Christianity. They had certain rights. The king had actually given them certain rights to wear. Even to wear upper garment, there is a royal proclamation. So the history of, it was in 1829 that Chanar women were allowed to wear what you call chatta, a kind of Christian kind of dress for their upper garment. But very often, Nair, Irava kind of violence, and Chanar, Lehala, you see, all these are a very violent history of caste conflict which continued well into the 20th century. I don't want to go into, you see, Shudra women couldn't wear any gold, any silver, in spite of the royal proclamation that they are allowed to do so. So in this kind of a context, there were attempts to resist the oppression of the lower caste, and Narayana Guru is part of a spectrum of reformers, or you can say thinkers. Chattambi Swamigal, Ayyankali. We have a series of very enlightened leaders who work from different directions. So it's important to recognize that Sri Narayana Guru's work happened in consonance with, in harmony with a number of other initiatives to resist the caste oppression. What makes him exceptionally different and maybe a pioneer kind of visionary is that he never ever confined himself to a single caste. I will occasion to return and take up this issue. He was never a leader of the Irava caste. He addressed a larger Kerala, and in his kind of poetic works, or in the kind of many other institution building several things, you can see a certain idea of maybe given his situation it looks utopian, but he was very, very strong in imagining a new Kerala and communicating to the common people at a place, in a moment when the majority of the lower caste were illiterate. majority of the lower caste had no access to education, this person could communicate, reach out, and make them aware that they are human. Make them aware that they are not born for what they are going through. There is a possibility of changing their destiny. It's unthinkable, given the 19th century state of oppression, to imagine a certain kind of possibility of a new, life itself. Guru was born in 1856 in an Irava middle class family near Thiruvananthapuram. That village, etc., is still very much there. He was initiated into Sanskrit and Ayurveda in the traditional format that was current in his times, with the disciples staying at the house of the teacher. He acquired Tamil through his own efforts, as it was spoken in this region. He started a school in his village for children, but later, after the death of his parents, he left home and took to wandering as a mendicant. Guru was born in 56 and died in 1928. So he became Nanu Ashan because he ran a small school for children. He had the habit of staying alone in secluded mountains and forests. And after 1884, he never stayed in any place permanently. Even a year before he passed away, he undertook a long journey to Sri Lanka, Ceylon, in those days. And his close association with Chattambi Swamigal, 1853 to 1924, Thaikad Ayya, 1814 to 1909, these are all scholars who were steeped in Tamil traditions of Siddhas. And this had an amazing impact on his transformation into a scholar and also a poet. We really do not know how Narayana Guru acquired a kind of scholarship which was not institutionally acquired. There is, we actually, lots of biographers, I am quoting from P.K. Balakrishnan, he says, there is a period of about 10 years in Narayana Guru's life of which we hardly know anything. And this perhaps gives us a clue to how he actually reinvented himself. He must have traveled across South India, Tamil Nadu particularly, Tirunelveli and many other places. And he perhaps knew South Kerala by like the palm of his hand. He stayed with the poorest of the poor. He stayed with Muslim fishermen. He stayed with old women who had no support. He was constantly moving, but always observing, absorbing, learning, and all these actually had an impact on the kind of poetry he will write, the kind of projects he will initiate. I quote P.K. Balakrishnan, the unknown period in Guru's life, this was in his early youth, holds the key to understanding his emergence as a fully formed leader of the people. Even after becoming a towering figure in Kerala, acceptable to all communities, he never lived in one place for more than 3 days or so. He persisted in this habit in old age as well. He lived among those considered as lower caste, the fisher folk, Muslims, and marginalized communities of every kind, sharing their food, observing their ways of living. He knew the topology of South India like the palm of his hand. And this is what enabled him to love the communities of Kerala with such openness, not in abstract theory, but in everyday practice. Sukumar Ayikode, a major Malayalam literary critic, also a social observer, he has observed that Guru did not become aware of discrimination based on caste after studying Vedanta. It was not through Vedanta that he came to the idea of caste and caste equality, etc. And Sukumar Ayikode says, I quote, he sought in Advaita a philosophy that can deny and defy the practice of caste discrimination. And he sought in social reforms a practical course of action to eradicate caste discrimination. Very often you find, you take philosophers, they hardly have the willingness to address the people, live among the people. And you also look ascetic sannyasis, they also keep away from, they are people who are solitary. You see, Guru was not a sannyasi of the traditional kind. Nobody initiated him into sannyas. In fact, once Narayana Guru even observed that it was the British who gave me sannyas. Very ironic. His life is full of many such anecdotes. People actually keep repeating them. This statement was largely because in a monarchy, in Travancore Maharaja kind of a dispensation, he had hardly any rights, neither civil rights nor human rights. By 1805, the colonial administration comes into being, criminal procedure code comes into being. There were court cases which Narayana Guru fought. And the court gave him exemption from appearing in the court. And he had reasons to think that he was treated better by the colonial dispensation. And he faced great animosity, hostility from the upper caste and entrenched kind of caste, upper caste people. And when you look at all this, you actually find a certain kind of breakthrough. What Guru actually achieves in Kerala at a particular moment, this cannot be understood without referring to the Arivipuram Pratishta. You see, this happens in 1889. Hope I'm not actually giving the wrong date. Yes. You see, what Guru used to actually visit this Arivipuram area and go into meditation among, he hardly, it was in March 1888, sorry, not 1889. 1889, I will be referring to some dates. In March 1888, in a place near Aruvikkara, he consecrated a temple of Shiva, breaching the Brahmanic authority to establish temples. He used to live there, and lots of people would come and meet him. It was Shivaratri, and on the day of Shivaratri, lots of people would congregate. And there was some expectation that Guru was planning something. And early morning, maybe around 3 or 4, Guru dipped himself in the stream, came out with a stone and consecrated that as an idol. You see, Shudra, a non-Brahmin, consecrating a deity, that to Shiva, was unheard of. And this was something which questions were asked. And his reply was, what I consecrated is an Irava Shiva. You see? Why do you worry? It's not a Brahmin Shiva. Mine is an Irava Shiva. And in this act of breaching a priestly domain, which actually has theological, theocratic implications, he unleashed the energy of an entire community of not one caste alone. It also had reverberations throughout the south. It actually, when questions were raised regarding his authority to carry out such an act, he answered that it was Irava Shiva that he had consecrated. And after consecrating the temple, he also wrote on a piece, on a wooden plank with a piece of lime, Jadibhedam Madadvesham Edumillade Sarvarum Sodarattvena Vazhunna Madrigasthanamanidu. Perhaps this was a blueprint for a modern Kerala. This is an exemplary abode of brotherhood where everyone lives in harmony without discrimination of caste or religious hatred. See, this 4 lines, which must be one of the early poetic composition of Guru, which became available to Malayali readers, and this still remains one of the most well-known and earliest poetic verses by Narayana Guru. You see, we need to look at the importance of this movement of 1888. You see, as I said, there is a missionary modernity, the emergence of prose, emergence of periodical, etc. The first popular Malayalam novel, Indulekha, gets published in 1889. The government of Madras formed the Marriage Commission in 1891 in response to a bill introduced in the Madras Legislative Assembly by Sri Shankaran Nair, etc. Again in 1891, the common people of Travancore for the very first time submitted a memorandum to the king, and this is normally called the Malayali Memorial. And what is the demand? That equality of job opportunities. See, there was a turbulence in the entire population acquiring different forms. You see, you find this kind of memoranda becoming a very constant, Malayali Memorial, the Nijava Memorial, Nair Memorial, etc. Each segment of the population demanding that we need to be represented, we need to be part of the government kind of, power structure. And this actually creates a certain kind of forward thrust. Guru was walking alone, but he was not alone in that sense, because the parallel kind of activities which was taking place in the domain of politics, culture, and also in the domains of what you call religious and other reforms, they all actually reinforced each other. They all actually had common agenda. They all perhaps had, and this is why Guru's works as a poet, Guru's works as a major, what he called, radical thinker, a revolutionary thinker. Maybe we talk of Aimé Césaire, or we talk about Fanon, and you see, but here was a person in 19th century who had hardly any exposure to Western education. And he could conceptualize a certain idea of just and equal society where the idea of the human actually defines the essential membership of all people. How do you reconstitute yourself as a human being? This has a long history. One word that recurs in Malayalam literature in the last 200 years is Manusyan. Recently I had an interview with Gopal Guru, and I had asked him a question. Since you know what Ambedkar wrote in Marathi, what are the common terms he uses in Marathi? The first word Gopal Guru mentioned, Manuski, Manus. Manus in Marathi means human being. This idea of the human being, I can actually cite at least 10 Malayalam novel, drama, stories, etc., which carries the word Manusyan in the title. Why is this idea of the human being actually it's capturing the imagination of an entire population? This was the future. This Manusyan was yet to emerge. This Manusyan was not already there. People were divided, people were violently separated, discriminated against. Women hardly had any access to education or public space or open. When I was doing a project, I read some old Malayalam newspapers in 1936. One Malayalam Madhubhumi newspaper reports Chanar, these members of this community for the very first time walked through a street, public street in Palghat with police, guarding them on all the four sides. Chanars were not allowed to be seen. If you are a Chanar, you have to actually move through, behind the hedges, they will never be, if they are seen, their body is something which will be at the disposal of the upper caste. It took, even after all these reforms in 1936, with police protection, they actually, such an emotional moment I had when I visited Georgia University, where there is a huge gate. They have written, for the very first time, 3 black students entered the campus of Georgia University, Atlanta, with army protecting them on all the sides. None of these, the idea of equality was never one without struggle, never one without conflict. Even today, whatever little we have acquired, we have actually been able to get, even that is slipping out. And that's the context in which we need to revisit the works of Guru. See, I wouldn't make a distinction between Guru the poet, Guru the reformer, Guru the saint. And very often it was the middle class who made a distinction between Guru the reformer, because Guru as a reformer becomes a rationalist. And as a rationalist, he becomes part of the narrative of modernity. But Guru's works, they were hymns and addressed to God and many such. And the middle class Malayali sensibility could not grasp how these poems reform. They perform a certain idea of transformation. What he was achieving, perhaps through his public project of creating awareness. You see, we need to actually remember that Guru was a lone fighter. Let's not think that he was always in meditation on hilltops and mountains. No. There are occasions when he walked into, there were lots of practices which were unacceptable. For example, even among Irava, they spent lot of money, moneyed feudal Irava lords, would celebrate when a girl menstruates for the first time. It becomes a big occasion, celebration. There are occasions when Guru walked into a big landlord's house and stopped the celebration. There are occasions he has stopped Jantu Bali. You see, lower caste used to actually kill and sacrifice animals. And Guru has walked into such places, told them this is not what actually as human beings we should do to propitiate God. So there are many such events which I am not actually going into. So when we speak of his works, I feel they actually seamlessly move between his what I would say imaginative and apprehension of the human kind of condition, rendering them into a certain poetic works. There are also prose works, etc. And interventions of this kind. And there are also a third level of, to make suffering, as raw suffering, it can only actually result in greater violence. Perhaps Guru knew there is a certain psychological side to this whole idea of oppression. When we read Dalit literature, this whole idea of victim, it haunts us even today. And victimization is something which this happens in Afro-American literature, this happens in the literature of First Nation or people who are indigenous population in New Zealand or Canada, etc. He transforms a traumatic view of history into philosophical reflections on the nature of suffering. By putting the felt life of the body at the center of his reflections, he is able to draw into his fold subdued vastly among themselves. Very often cultural anthropologists and sociologists who study quote unquote pre-modern cultures, they proceed on the assumption that we cannot critically see our way of life from the inside without the disciplinary training offered by modernity. But Guru, in one of the temples, Kalavankod, I think, he had this temple consecration for quite some time. Later, he also had a problem with that I will come to later. He consecrated a mirror, and this has been done in the Siddha tradition in Tamil Nadu and some other places. You walk into the temple and what you see is a mirror and you see yourself. This very idea that you could actually see the God in you, or you can actually see the human in resonance with the divine, was a way of assaulting a certain subjugation. How do you actually subjugate the idea of subjugation? You can't become human whether you are victimizer, upper caste, or whether you are lower caste, the victim. You both are actually subjugated in different ways. You are caught in a chain of subjugation. And Guru, perhaps for the first time in India, maybe there are other thinkers, I will mention a few. When Guru used this kind of metaphors like the mirror, it was his way of demonstrating the need for critical reflection in a society where caste had reduced people to creatures of habit. The moment you see upper caste man, you remove your your dress, your everything, your body undergoes a change. It is the body which actually, caste is always written on the body. The way you relate to the people around you. And in poetry, he spoke as a critical insider who could evaluate the transient and the contingent from the perspective of the universal. I think this cosmopolitan universal, he uses Advaita, interpreting it from through his own experiences. Guru was not replicating what Shankaracharya or many others actually passed around as the Advaita ideology. So, when we look at, I will be looking at some of his poems and coming back to particularly his long dialogue with Gandhi and this question of Advaita. In using Advaita philosophy to question the legitimacy of caste system, he was reading it against the grain. This was possible in poetry, not in a philosophical treatise. Here he belongs to the group of poets like Jnanadeva in Maharashtra, Marathi, Tukaram and Kabir, who use the power of words to stand witness to their times and address God as a contemporary from the perspective of a suffering subject. Guru's first-hand knowledge of the social divisions had convinced him that there were no easy solutions to the problems that plagued Kerala or Indian society. While concluding his conversation with Sri Narayana Guru, Gandhi had asked, I will take up this again, Gandhi asked him, we are engaged in a struggle for people's worldly liberty. Will it succeed? Guru replied, it will succeed. However, when we think of the entrenched nature of the problems, Gandhi may have to be born again for the project's complete fulfillment. Prophetic words spoken in 1926 or so. So, when he had a clarity, Tagore came and met him. He actually was constantly on the move, but people would be meeting him. He would be interacting. And many of his poems would actually be written on occasions where, you see, he was required to, somebody will come and say, we are going through a great drought. And he writes a poem called Ardhanarishwara Stavam. And there are lines like, Echil chorunda pullikiniyoru maganam ni irappali jnano pichakkaran. Very strong, raw Malayalam words. This cannot come without a deep involvement in what people actually suffer. If I put it in English, it will be like Shiva, then Subramanian, and of course he is comparing, he says, you, the son of a wandering mendicant, is a beggar yourself, and I am no better. I am also a beggar. You see, when these kind of discourse is used in what actually is a hymn to God, its temporal relation with the real, that changes completely. We need to actually look at Narayana Guru differently as a poet, because even a poem like Shiva Shatakam in praise of Shiva, it ends on a four-line stanza which could be written by a romantic poet in the 20th century. He is talking about the illumination, spiritual illumination, but the metaphors he uses are extremely, very, very relevant, contemporary. In fact, in many poems, I am sure Vidwan Krishna will be actually singing one of the very famous, that is again, there are many, when you have temptation to talk about Kali Nadagam, I am sure he will be singing a few lines. You will not be able to understand this entire thing, but I am only suggesting the energy of his you see, look at, you may not understand, there are some Sanskrit words. Kalinatakam, 4 lines. Samasta prapancham srijichum bharichum mudasam harichum rasichum remichum kalichum pulachum mahaghoram vilichum amananda deshe vasichum telinyum paranyum tulumbum prapancham. You see the energy, the energy with these words come. This is no ordinary poet. This is no ordinary thinker. This is no ordinary reformer. India is yet to actually come to grips with who Narayana Guru is as a poet, as a reformer, as a saint, because he cannot be segregated into these actually are terminology we have invented to suit certain kind of people, certain kind of context. He moved away from those contexts. In Janani Navaratna Manjari again, there are very, you see, many of you who know, I'm sure Kabir has very fine, wonderful lines. Jini, Jini, Bini, Chadariya, Kahe ke, Tana, Kahe ki Bharni, etc. Almost some of the metaphor Guru is using comes very close to. You see, you have covered yourself with the mysterious veil made of the delicate strings of time and space, concealing your true nature, etc. The poem goes on. But the metaphorical energy and its entire thrust comes from a tradition which is not contemporary. Actually, I would quote, just make a suggestion. There is an Italian philosopher, Agamben, who says a contemporary is someone who moves away from his own contemporary context. You can relate to your own time only being outside it. You see, he has a whole essay on the idea of the contemporary, and he says only those who address the darkness of his own times can become the contemporary of that period. Agamben is using Nietzsche. Nietzsche is, you see, so maybe when a poet speaks as a mad lover, you see, or as a stranger, he is closer to the spirit of a time. He invented, what I am arguing is, he uses a mask. You see, his hymns to God, his hymns to God, they use the mask of a convention. Many of the poems are conventional, quote unquote. But this allows him to address the thick darkness of a period which could not be penetrated with the colonial modernity. Guru distanced himself the two narratives of modernity which created his context. One was the nationalist pan-Indian modernity which created a Gandhi and which also complicated India's idea of itself. And the other was the missionary local modernity which perhaps gave reforms to a certain incremental kind of change. Yes, education. Yes, women school, or a few kind of, but this actually, when he speaks with Gandhi, you can see the complications which have accumulated through both these narratives of modernity. And perhaps Guru was aware that you need to actually, you can be present in the contemporary only by completely leaving it out, only by going beyond the idea of the contemporary. So his poems create such an archaeology. There is an experiential kind of argument in poem after poem which deals with violence. You see, you cannot write about caste when you are actually denied equality in a society because you belong to a particular caste. Ashan wrote only one poem called Thiyakkuttiyude Vicharam, the thoughts of a Thiya boy. He never again wrote a poem of any social realist kind of mode. He wrote Simhaprasavam or poems of that kind which perhaps could grapple with the idea of a subject, a different kind of subjectivity. And this is where you see poems like Atmopadesha Shatakam, you see many of his other poems, all these actually are grappling with the Kerala situation, but they do it in a very, very different way. You see, I don't have the time to go through, I will only give, you see, if you take Atmopadesha Shatakam, the first 10, I am 100 stanza, first 10 talking about knowledge. What is the importance of knowledge? And I am just summarizing, paraphrasing for the uninitiated. Then you have the second 10 stanzas, you see, where the whole question of, you see, oneness and manyness, this whole, and there are stages of yogic experiences. I am just quoting 2 lines. Adhiga Vishala Marupradesham Onnai Nadi Perugunna Pole Vannu Nadam Srudigalil Veenu Turakkum Achiyennum Yedamiyelum Yedivariyanayidenam. You see, when you practice yoga, when you are grappling with the evolution of your own unconscious, there are stages of great panic. There are visionary things which may destabilize you. Suddenly you will hear sounds, you may hear like, you say, flooding of a huge plains. Guru captures such states. This is a poem which also talks about his own evolution as a, call it yogi, call it you say, self-realized person. Then the third, 21 to 30, what is the idea of Priya? He has a whole theory of how do we begin discriminating. You see, he says we all have certain things which we like, but then others also have things which they like. And if you have time to pause and look, there is no difference between what you like and what they like. Priyam oru jadiyan priyam tadviya priyam avira priyam. You see, he gives a long argument. This kind of a psychological idea of desire. You see, desire is at the root of violence, discrimination, the will to power, the will to dominate, the will to actually subjugate. Guru was using the discourse of yoga, or call it Advaita. He was very, very far away from the traditional Shankara kind of Advaita. You see, he suddenly, very, very important, I won't quote many now. Avan ivanen ariyunnadokke orthal avanil adimamayor altmarupam. You call he, she. So you call people. But then if you think they are all manifestations of the same Altmarupam. There is a basic human, you see, you can say primordial. We all belong to the same kind of human form. Then he says 2 lines which have become a kind of standard quote in Malayalam. Avanavan alpa sukhattina ajarikunnava aparanu sukhattinai varenam. what you actually observe for your own well-being should not harm the other. You see, this question of the other, which we discuss a whole lot in sociology and politics in the last 2 decades. Guru has a whole 10 to 15 stanzas where he talks about what is the idea of the other. How does it come? And how do you overcome this? And then he again talks about Turiya Bodham, Turiyam, a very complex state of awareness. You reach there after a whole state of evolution. The types of knowledge, he doesn't say Vidya, Avidya. He talks about several, Vishama, Sama, Anya. Even to write an essay with this kind of concepts would be very challenging. Here is a poet writing about knowledge and the divisions of knowledge and subdivisions of those knowledge. And toward the middle, he also talks about all religion essentially talk about the same principle. In 1914 or so, he called a Sarva Mada Sammelanam in Aluvai. You see, you should remember 1891, that was the time in Chicago, Vivekananda had gone to address a Sarva Mada Sammelanam. 19th century was the time world witnessed a whole lot of religious conflict across continents. And Narayana Guru was talking about this in his poem written in 1897. He actually saying, Pala Madasaravu Megamenna Paradulagil Anail Andharenna Pole Pala Vidha Yukti Paranyu Pamarenmar Aveladu Kanda, etc. He says, people talk about religion like people who talk, blind people talking about the elephant. This is my religion, this is what I say, but you don't see the elephant as a whole. Then he makes a very, maybe even today it is Uru Mada Manyanu Nindyam Unnilodum Karivam Aparenda Kanakinu Nunamagum Dharail Idinde Rahasyam Unu Tane Tananarivalavum Brahmamennarinjidayanam. This very idea that the other religion is inferior, this is Brahmam, this is misconception. Knowledge alone, that's where in Guru the only word which comes right from the beginning till the last is the idea of Arivu. The Dravidian word Arivu is there in Kannada, in Telugu, in Tamil, Malayalam. And this Arivu, Arivu, these are the words which recur in Guru, and again, that actually is the short form. Arul is the same as, comes very close to, in an article in Malayalam I have argued, Shabbat, or this whole idea of Shabbat you find in maybe you see Kabir, and you have a whole lot of, there are parallels. He was a contemporary of perhaps Sant poets who actually had to confront many such, you see, emerging contradictions. I will not go into, I must have conveyed how, you see, so the other poems, this is the most important, I would say. If a good translation is made into Kannada, that should be compulsory reading for all, you see, literary, social science and other students. I will end with some reference to his final stage. There are many things which I wanted to convey, but this always, you see, we have to be. He has written Anugamba Shatakam. Maybe Vidwan Krishnaji will definitely render some of those, you see, a hymn to compassion. You see, can you imagine a poet actually again and again taking up this idea of compassion, particularly in Jadi Nirnayam, Jadi Lakshanam, he goes about. I will very briefly mention his long dialogue with, I have actually only a small paragraph with Gandhi, and then I will come to Anukampa Shatakam, because that's important. Gandhi visited Kerala during 8 to 19 March 1925, because there was a satyagraha going on in Vaikam temple, and he met the priest in Vaikam temple. It was a disaster. They didn't even allow Gandhi to enter, you see, that Mana or the Nambudiri mansion. The vengeance of history is that the very mansion where Gandhi was not allowed is now a trade union office. That's a different story. You see, so his meeting with the Brahmin priest of the temple was not a success. When Gandhi met Guru, he initially asked him about the movement, this Vaikam Satyagraha movement, and whether there was any need to make any changes in the movement. Guru was following it very closely, and Guru said, I don't think any changes are necessary. Guru also supported the non-violent mode of Satyagraha. Gandhi went on to ask his opinion about conversion. And Gandhi asked, some say that we must resort to religious conversion to attain freedom. Does Swamiji give permission for that? And Sri Narayana Guru replied, it's being seen that those who are converting are gaining freedom. Looking at this, people can be blamed for thinking that religious conversion is good. Gandhi wanted to know specifically if Guru thought Hindu religion was sufficient for spiritual liberation. Guru replied, there are ways of liberation in other religions too. He was very clear, every religion will lead to salvation. Gandhiji repeated the question, asking him to leave out the question of other religions. And Guru replied, he felt Hindu religion was enough for spiritual liberation. But Sri Narayana Guru added that, but people desire material freedom more, material liberation more. Gandhi was insistent and wanted a clear statement from Guru. Perhaps Gandhi knew one statement, religious conversion will have great impact not only on South India but across India. Gandhi was insistent and wanted a clear statement from Guru against religious conversion, but Guru held on to his stand and only said that religious conversion was not necessary for spiritual liberation. The underlying tension in the conversation, if you follow it, the script is available, it can be studied as a text, and we need to, you see, Gandhi's strong faith in Varnashrama Dharma. Here was a person who has moved beyond. Narayana Guru never referred to Bhagavad Gita. There were a couple of occasions when somebody asked him, and he said, and they also said, this justifies Varnashrama Dharma. And Guru said, it can't be. Very succinct answer. His silence on many topics were equally very significant. That we need to remember. Guru's perspective is a continuation of what we discussed earlier with reference to his poems on Advaita, where he does not differentiate between the material and the spiritual liberation. You cannot liberate the soul and the body. This is the Tamil Shaiva Siddha tradition, where the body is seen as primary. So, it's not illusion. It's not Jagat Mithya. He doesn't follow the idea of the world as an illusion. In fact, Guru had pointed out a tree where they were talking, a tree nearby, to say that although the leaves are of different shapes, the same sap runs through all of them. For Guru, the question of struggle for social freedom was not separate from the quest for political freedom. Unlike Gandhi, Guru speaks from the perspective of dharmam or ethical thought, and samudayam, community. He was thinking of the entire Kerala as a samudayam. How do you actually create a samudayam of people very closely, you see? And this actually is reverberates throughout his, you see, in Anukamba Shatakam. I don't have the time to go through. Only one, you see, Arul Ullavananu Jivi. You see, he talks about Anukampa, compassion. You may actually be everything, you may be, but if you lack this, you have to, you see, your sensibility, your imagination, your mind has to resonate with the suffering world outside. Anukamba, there is a kind of kambanam, there is a kind of vibration with those who are deprived, the ability to be one with the other. This he finds as a very primary condition of liberation. Anukamba Shatakam is Arul Anpu Anukamba. Arul Anukamba Muninam Purul Onnanid Jeevatarakam. Arul Ullavanana Jeeviyan Nuruvittidugai Navachari. Is this Navachari 9-letter syllable kind of Arul Ullavanana Jeevi. Arul is Kripa, compassion. Anpu is also kindness, and Anukampa. You see, this is something you again and again come across in Tamil Siddhar, in Tirukkural there are, and that's one thing I will emphasize toward the end. His poems is an echo chamber. Guru can't be read without reference to oral traditions of various kinds. We don't know how much he wrote in Sanskrit, Tamil and Malayalam. He translated Ishavasya Upanishad, Tirukkural, only a small fragment, but he must have been actually carrying many of these. Nobody has ever seen Narayana Guru sitting and writing a poem. Lots of people have said he would compose, remember, and then recite it to his. And that's why there are many versions of some of these poems. His Shishyas will actually take down. This was his manner of. So this is a kind of tradition which was in dialogue with multiple traditions, oral, mostly oral. And this also partook of an aesthetic which was not in that sense the emerging modern aesthetics of the late 19th century. In terms of diction, he uses words which actually can be traced to old Tamil, Sen Tamil. I am sure the kind of effort Sri Vidwan Krishna had actually put into deciphering these poems itself would actually, you see, he could write a book on that. These are not poems which you can enter, though the rhythm and so many other things could be understood. So there is an entire texture. We are teachers of poetry. I also write poetry. So poetry is in the texture. There is a texture. You quote a line from Narayana Guru and any Malayali would know this is Guru's poetry. And what makes it Guru's poetry is the texture. When you look at a cloth, you talk about the texture. There is a weaving there. And this weaving is done through multiple memories. It's not individualist. And that's why the lower class, his illiterate followers, they always internalize them. If today we have Narayana Guru as a poet, we are indebted to the illiterate people who thronged his sabhas, or he hardly spoke. Only in that Aluva Sarvamada Sammelanam he had an Arip, he did not speak, it was read out, and there he had written, it's actually Vadikanum Jaikanum Allah. It's not to argue and conquer. Ariyanum Arikanum Ana is a Medanum. It's to know and to make known. It's to know each other and to make known what actually has to be known. And perhaps we need to actually learn from his example in many, multiple fields. I will stop here. I could go on, but I'm sure you have listened carefully. I feel honored by such an august audience, and if I could actually fulfill even a fragment, a small fraction of the expectations which the organizers communicated to you, I will be extremely happy. Thank you.